She was a black woman in a room full of wolves, and she walked in like she owned it. The office smelled like expensive scotch and unspoken threats. 42 floors above the city. A desk so large it wasn't furniture. It was a warning. And behind it sat Jeon Hyuk-San, the Crow. A Korean mafia boss who had made grown men leave rooms without saying a word. A man with a crow tattooed up the left side of his neck, climbing toward his jaw like it was trying to reach something. A man who had not been surprised by anything in 6 years. Until her. Layla Renee Caldwell, a black woman in a red dress, gold earrings catching the amber light, walked through a room full of his most dangerous men and sat on his desk. Not beside it, not near it, on it. 6 armed men froze, and the most feared man in the city looked up at her and felt something he had no name for. His voice came low, controlled, the kind of quiet that has teeth. "Get out!" Every man in that room moved at once, and then there were 2. What no one in that building knew, not his men, not his enemies, not even the man who thought he had orchestrated everything, was that Layla hadn't come there for a job. She had come with a secret that could destroy him. But what she discovered inside that office changed everything she thought she knew about power, about sacrifice, and about the kind of man who hides something irreplaceable behind 20 years of silence. Before starting the story, comment down below where you were watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The city never slept on nights like this. When the rain came sideways and the neon signs bled their colors down the glass of buildings that had no business being so tall, so clean, so indifferent to everything happening inside them. On the 42nd floor of a tower that officially housed an import and logistics company, one with impeccable tax records, a team of highly paid lawyers, and a lobby that smelled of fresh flowers changed every morning at 7, there was an office that most employees of that building had never seen. Not because it was hidden, but because something in the air around it told people, in the wordless language of survival instinct, that looking too long in that direction was not a wise decision. The door was heavy, dark wood, no nameplate. Inside, the room was the color of controlled power. Dark shelves lined with books that were actually read, a bar cart with a single bottle of scotch that was refilled every Thursday, and a desk so large it seemed less like furniture and more like a declaration. A statement made in carved wood and cold ambition. I do not come to you. You come to me. Behind that desk, on most nights, sat Jeon Hyuk-San, the Crow. He was 38 years old, though he carried the particular stillness of a man who had stopped measuring time in years a long time ago. He measured it in decisions, in outcomes, in the weight of what had been done, and the heavier weight of what could never be undone. His face was composed in the way that only men who have learned to survive betrayal after betrayal ever learn to compose themselves. Not cold exactly, but controlled, the way a river is controlled by the shape of its banks. You would not know, looking at him, that underneath the perfectly fitted black suit and the open collar of his white shirt, underneath the Audemars Piguet that caught the low amber light of his office like a small secret, he was a man who had not slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 6 years. The crow tattoo on the left side of his neck, wings spread, beak open, feathers climbing toward his jaw, had been done by a man in Seoul who no longer practiced his craft. It had hurt for 3 days. Hyuk-San had not mentioned it once. On his right hand, the black gold ring on his index finger turned slowly, once as he looked at the folder open in front of him. A name, a number. A problem that would need to be resolved before the weekend. He turned one page, then another, and then the door opened. He did not look up immediately. In his world, people waited until he acknowledged them. It was not arrogance, or rather, it was not only arrogance. It was a test administered constantly and silently, and the results told him everything he needed to know about a person within the first 30 seconds of their presence. But this time, the person who entered did not wait. He heard the sound first, heels on marble, precise and unhurried. The rhythm of someone who had decided exactly where they were going and was simply executing the journey. Then he heard the low slide of weight settling onto the edge of his desk, and the whisper of fabric. Something fitted, something red. And only then did he raise his eyes. Layla Renee Caldwell was sitting on his desk. Not near the edge, not timidly perched, sitting on it the way someone sits on something that belongs to them. Legs crossed, the deep red of her dress catching the amber light and turning it into something that had no place in a room where contracts were signed in silence and men disappeared when they stopped being useful. Her hair, black, straight, falling to her shoulders with the precision of something deliberate, did not move when she tilted her head slightly to the left and looked at him. The gold earrings caught the light. The thin collar at her throat, fine chain, small moon pendant, rose and fell once with her breath. She did not smile. But her eyes held something that was worse than a smile, in the way that things which cannot be categorized are always more unsettling than things which can. In the room behind her, 6 of his men stood frozen. They had been in the middle of a conversation, a serious one. The kind that required locked doors and lowered voices. And this woman had simply walked through it as though it were a hallway. Hyuk-San looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his men. His voice, when it came, was not loud. It never was. Volume, he had learned early, was the resort of men who were not sure they would be obeyed. He was always sure. Get out. No one moved for exactly 2 seconds. Then they all moved at once, the way water moves when a drain is opened. Not panicked, but complete, immediate, total. The door clicked shut behind the last of them. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture, that presses against the ears, that makes the space between 2 people feel both smaller and larger at once. Layla did not fill it immediately. She let it exist. And that, more than anything she had done since she walked through that door, told him that she was not afraid of him. In 6 years, he could count on one hand the number of people who had sat in this room and were not afraid of him. 3 of them were dead. 1 had left the country. 1 was his mother, and she had been gone for 11 years. He leaned back in his chair. The leather made no sound. "You know what happens to people who disrespect me in this office," he said. It was not a question. "I know," she said. Her voice was even. Not performing calm, actually calm, in the way that people are calm when they know something that changes the calculus of fear. And yet, she agreed. She reached beside her. She had carried nothing visible when she walked in, and for a half-second this registered as strange, and produced an envelope from somewhere in the folds of her movement, the way a magician produces something from an angle that should not have contained it. She placed it on the desk between them. She did not slide it toward him. She set it down and left it there, equidistant, as though it belonged to neither of them yet. "You need me," she said. or more precisely, you need what's in that envelope. And I need something from you. So before you have someone escort me out of this building and pretend tonight didn't happen, I'd suggest you open it." He looked at the envelope for 3 seconds, then at her. There was a quality to his attention that most people in his position had lost. The ability to truly look at someone, rather than simply assess them for threat level and dismiss. He looked at her the way he looked at problems that interested him. Completely, without hurry, as though the looking itself was part of the solution. She held his gaze with the steady patience of someone who had already played this moment out in her mind many times, and had arrived at the version that worked. He reached forward, opened the envelope. The photographs came first, then the documents. Then the 3 pages of names, dates, and transfer records that represented 8 months of theft conducted by a man whose name appeared on the org chart 2 lines below Hyuk-San's own. A man who sat in the room that had just emptied. Hyuk-San read without expression. He turned each page with the same unhurried deliberateness. When he reached the last one, he set it down, aligned it with the others, and placed the stack back into the envelope. He did not close it. "How?" he said. "I'm a very good secretary," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something colder than a smile, and somehow more honest. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." She did not answer that, which, in its own way, was its own kind of answer. Outside, the rain had not stopped. It fell against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor with the patient insistence of something that has all the time in the world. The city below was indifferent and enormous, full of lives that would never intersect with this room, with this desk, with the space between these 2 people who were, in this moment, performing a negotiation that had no established rules. Hyuk-San turned the ring on his finger once. Slowly. "What is it," he said, "that you need from me?" And Layla Renee Caldwell, who had walked into the most dangerous room in the city, wearing red and carrying other people's secrets like weapons, took a breath that was just barely slower than all the ones before it. The only sign, the only one, that the answer to that question cost her something to give. She told him about Marcus. Not everything. Not yet. She gave him the shape of it. A younger brother, 24 years old, who had gotten tangled in something he did not fully understand. The way young men in certain neighborhoods get tangled in things. Not through stupidity, but through the particular vulnerability of being poor and proud, and offered something that looked, from a certain angle, like a solution. A debt. A number that had been growing for 4 months like something alive, fed by interest rates that existed in no legal document anywhere in the world. She told him the number. Hyuk-San did not react to it. He simply listened in the way he listened to everything, completely, without interruption, without the small performative gestures of attention that most people use to signal they are paying attention rather than simply paying it. He watched her speak. He watched her hands, which stayed still in her lap. He watched the place just below her collarbone where the small moon pendant rested against her skin, rising and falling with each breath, the only visible measure of what was happening inside her. When she finished, the silence came back. "And you thought," he said slowly, "that if you brought me something useful, the debt would disappear." "Someone told me that, yes." "Who?" She gave him a name, a middle-tier name, someone in the outer ring of his operation, far enough from the center to have a degree of independence, close enough to have access to leverage. Hyuk-San turned the ring on his finger. Once. The gesture was so habitual it seemed unconscious, but nothing about this man was unconscious. Everything had been decided long ago and was now simply being executed. "And you believed him," Hyuk-San said. "I believed that the alternative was worse," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, but a kind of recalibration, the way a very precise instrument adjusts when it encounters a measurement it did not anticipate. "You can go," he said. "I'll look into what you've brought me. Someone will contact you." She did not move immediately, which meant she had more to say, and was deciding how much of it to release. "My brother," she said. "Someone will contact you," he repeated. The same words, the same tone, but the second time carried something the first did not. Not a reassurance, but something adjacent to it, something that existed in the space where reassurance would have been if this were a different kind of room and these were different kinds of people. She uncrossed her legs, slid off the desk, straightened the red dress with one smooth movement, picked up the clutch she had set on the corner of the desk, small, black, gold clasp, and walked toward the door. She was 3 steps from it when he spoke again. "Caldwell." She stopped. Did not turn immediately. "That name you gave me," he said. "The man who told you to come here. Did he tell you what to do if I said no?" She turned then, and the way she turned told him the answer before she spoke it. A half-second of something moving through her expression that she did not fully catch in time. "He told me you wouldn't say no," she said. Hyuk-San nodded once. Slowly. As though something had just confirmed itself. "Go home," he said. "Lock your door tonight." She left. The door closed. The room held its silence. Hyuk-San sat with the envelope on the desk in front of him, and the small moon pendant afterimage in the amber light, and the turning ring on his right hand, and thought for a long time about something that had nothing to do with the photographs in the envelope and everything to do with the name she had given him. She came back the next morning at 8:45, which was her scheduled time, because whatever else was happening, she was still, on paper, his secretary, and the cover required the continuity of ordinary things. She brought coffee, 2 cups, his black, hers with something in it that he had never asked about, and set his on the edge of the desk, and sat at her own station outside the office, and answered the phone twice, and forwarded 3 emails, and did not look at the door any more than she always did. At 10:15, he opened the door and said her name. She went in. "Close it," he said. She closed it. "Sit." She sat, in the chair across from his desk this time, the proper chair, the chair for people who had been invited, which felt like a different category than the night before, though she could not have said with precision whether it was a demotion or a promotion. He had a second folder open on the desk, thinner than the one she had brought, newer. "The man whose name you gave me last night," he said. "He has been working in my organization for 3 years. He has access to certain operational information. Not everything, but enough." He let that sentence sit between them before continuing. 3 months ago, certain details about a shipment reached a competitor before they should have. I assumed it was a communications error. 2 months ago, it happened again. I assigned 2 of my people to investigate quietly. They found nothing. He paused. Or I was told they found nothing. He turned the folder toward her. She looked at it without touching it. The name at the top was not the man she had given him last night. It was the man she had seen leaving this office yesterday, 3 steps ahead of the others. The one who had not looked back. This, Hyuk-San said, is the man who gave your brother's debt to the middle-tier contact, who then sent you here. The debt itself was manufactured. Your brother owed nothing. The number was created specifically to produce leverage, to produce you. In this building, in this office. Feeding me whatever you could find, while feeding something else to someone I have not yet identified. The room felt different suddenly. Smaller. The amber light from the single lamp on his desk felt closer. Layla said nothing for a moment. She was doing what she always did when the ground moved. She was finding the new geometry of it, locating where the walls were, recalculating the distance to every exit. Marcus never owed anyone anything, she said. It was not a question, but it needed to be said aloud to become fully real. No, Hyuk-San said. She breathed in slowly, out. How long have you known? I suspected from the second night, he said. I confirmed it this morning. And you're telling me now because whoever built this, he said, used your brother to build it. Which means your brother is not safe while this remains unresolved. And because... He stopped, turned the ring once. You brought me something real. When you didn't have to. She looked at him across the width of that enormous desk. He was watching her with that complete, unhurried attention, and she understood in that moment that this was what he looked like when he had decided to trust someone. Not warm, not open, but present in a way that meant he had made a calculation, and the calculation had come out in her favor. And he was not the kind of man who made that calculation lightly or reversed it easily. What happens now? She said. Now, he said, you keep doing exactly what you've been doing. You come in at 8:45. You answer the phone. You forward the emails. You sit at that desk outside that door, and you give absolutely no indication that anything has changed. And my brother is already being moved somewhere safer, he said, as of this morning. She stared at him. He had moved Marcus before he told her. Before she could react, before she could make any decision based on the information, before she could warn anyone, or panic, or do any of the things that people do when they learn that the people they love are in danger. He had simply handled it, quietly, the way he handled everything. She did not know whether to be grateful or frightened by that. She suspected the correct answer was both. Why? She said, and the word was smaller than she intended. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the rain-cleaned windows, the city moved in its enormous, indifferent way, full of ordinary Tuesday morning business, people carrying coffee and hailing taxis, and having arguments about small things. Because someone is trying to destroy something I've spent 20 years building, he said. And they were careless enough to use someone who had no idea what they were being used for. That kind of carelessness, he paused, tends to make me protective of the person who was used. Especially, he said, and here something moved in his voice that had not been there before, something controlled, but not entirely. When that person walked into my office in a red dress and sat on my desk rather than run. Layla Renee Caldwell had been prepared for many versions of this conversation. She had run them in her mind for weeks. The version where he threw her out, The version where he had her followed. The version where he was exactly what everyone said he was, and this ended the way things ended when you got too close to men like him. She had not been prepared for this version. She had not been prepared for the way his voice sounded when he said the word protective, carrying it carefully, like something he was not entirely used to the weight of. She looked down at the thin folder still open on the desk, at the name at the top, at the chain of decisions that had been made by someone, somewhere, to put her in this room, at this desk, across from this man. And how that chain, designed to be a weapon against him, had instead produced something neither of them had been asked to want, and neither of them had quite managed to prevent. "When does it end?" she said. "Soon," he said. It was the closest thing to a promise she had ever heard him make. The days that followed had the particular quality of a held breath. Layla came in every morning at 8:45. She set his coffee on the edge of the desk, she answered the phone, she forwarded the emails, she sat at the station outside his office with the posture of someone who had nothing to hide and the interior of someone who was hiding everything. And she performed the ordinary choreography of her role with the precision of a woman who understood that the most dangerous thing she could do right now was appear to be anything other than exactly what her employment contract said she was. She was very good at this. She had always been very good at this, at the performance of normalcy under pressure, at the particular discipline of keeping her face arranged in expressions that corresponded to the situation rather than to what was actually moving through her at any given moment. It was a skill she had developed early, in a household where money was a source of constant low-grade tension, and showing fear was a luxury that solved nothing. Marcus had never learned it. He felt everything on the surface, her brother. Joy and anger and worry all arriving immediately on his face, like weather on an open field. It was one of the things she loved most about him, and one of the things that had, ultimately, made him easy to use. She thought about him every morning on the elevator ride up to the 42nd floor. She thought about where he was now. Somewhere safer, Hyuk-San had said, and she had learned in the days since that somewhere safer meant a specific apartment in a building 3 neighborhoods away, with a man she had never met stationed at the end of the hall, and that Marcus had been told only that a friend of a friend had arranged it temporarily, and that he should stay put and not ask questions. Marcus, to his credit, had not asked many questions. He had always trusted her instincts, even when he did not understand them. She had not told him anything. Not yet. There was nothing to tell that would not make things worse. On the 4th day, the man whose name sat at the top of Hyuk-San's thin folder, the one who had been in this office the night she sat on the desk, the one who had not looked back when he left, stopped by her station in the morning and asked her, with a smile that reached everywhere except his eyes, whether she had managed to settle in comfortably, whether she found the role manageable, whether there was anything she needed. She smiled back with equal warmth and equal depth, which was to say, none. "Everything is perfect," she said. "Thank you for asking." He nodded. His eyes moved to the closed door of Hyuk-San's office for exactly 1 second, then back to her. "He can be difficult to work for," the man said, with the practiced casualness of someone delivering a message inside a sentence. "If you ever find the environment challenging, there are people who understand that. People who can make things easier." "I'll keep that in mind," she said. He left. She waited until the elevator doors had closed behind him before she allowed herself a single slow breath through her nose. Then she picked up her phone, typed 4 words in a message thread that looked, to anyone who might be reviewing her communications, like a conversation with a dry cleaning service, and sent it. 40 minutes later, Hyuk-San opened his office door and said her name. She went in. Close the door. He approached you, Hyuk-San said. It was not a question. This morning, he was careful about it. Indirect. What exactly did he say? She repeated it word for word. She had a good memory, the kind that recorded not just content, but cadence, the specific order of words, the pauses. Hyuk-San listened without moving. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window. He stood with his back to her for a long moment, looking at the city, the black of his suit absorbing the morning light, while the crow on his neck faced the glass. He's accelerating, Hyuk-San said, to the window more than to her. Whatever the timeline was, he's moved it forward. He made contact with you because something changed, something he didn't expect. You, she said. He turned, a question on his face that he did not ask aloud. You moved Marcus, she said. Quietly, without going through normal channels. He would have noticed the absence of certain information from people who are supposed to feed it to him. He would have known you moved independently. That told him something shifted. Hyuk-San looked at her for a moment, with that complete, recalibrating attention. You think clearly under pressure, he said. I think clearly always, she said. The pressure just makes it more visible. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. That same, not quite smile. But it stayed longer this time. He moved back toward the desk, sat, picked up the black gold ring that he had set on the desk's surface. She had not noticed him remove it, which meant she had not been watching his hands as carefully as she thought, and put it back on his index finger. Tonight, he said, I'm going to do something that will look, to anyone watching, like a routine meeting. A dinner. There are 2 other people who will be there. You will also be there. She waited. Not as my secretary, he said. As someone I brought because I wanted to. Someone I trust. The word trust in his mouth had the weight of something that had been carried a long distance. You're using me as a signal, she said. I'm using the fact that he already approached you, Hyuk-San said. He thinks you're available to be turned. I want him to believe he's succeeding. I want him comfortable enough to move. And what happens when he moves? Then it ends, he said. The same 2 words as before, but closer now, less abstract. She looked at him across the desk, the amber light, the bottle of scotch on the cart that was never offered, but always present, the books on the dark shelves that were actually read, the man behind the desk who had been built by years of surviving decisions made in rooms that smelled like this one, and who sat in that particular stillness of his and watched her with something in his eyes that his voice had not yet been given permission to say. What do I need to do? She said. The restaurant was the kind of place that did not advertise. It existed for people who already knew about it. A single floor above a street in a part of the city that had been expensive for so long, it had stopped trying to prove it. The lighting was low and warm. The tables were set far enough apart that conversations did not carry. The staff moved like water around objects. Present, necessary, invisible. Layla wore black that night. Not the red, deliberately not the red, something more fluid. A dress that moved when she moved, with a neckline that made a different kind of statement than the power of the red had made. The gold earrings again. The moon pendant, her hair straight and precise against her shoulders. She arrived with Hyuk-San, which meant she arrived in the back seat of a black car that stopped exactly where it intended to stop, and she was helped out by a man whose suit, did not quite conceal the shape of what was beneath it, and she walked beside Hyuk-San into the restaurant with the composed ease of someone who had done this before, which she had not, but which she was performing well enough that the distinction did not matter. The two other men at the table stood when they approached. Pleasantries were exchanged in the measured language of people who conduct their business in the space between what is said and what is meant. Layla smiled at the right moments and said nothing that mattered, and listened to everything. 40 minutes into the dinner, he arrived. He was not supposed to be there. That was clear from the half-second of recalibration that moved through Hyuk-San's face, gone so quickly that only someone who had been studying that face for weeks would have caught it. He had been expected, but not this early. Not before the other two men had left. He sat down with the smoothness of a man who had been practicing his entrance, ordered something from the passing server without looking at the menu, and turned his attention to Layla with a warmth that was constructed so carefully it almost looked real. "I didn't know you'd be joining tonight," he said to her. "Last-minute invitation," she said, and looked at Hyuk-San with an expression she had prepared for exactly this moment. A look of uncomplicated warmth, of ease, of a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be and had no other agenda in the world. She felt Hyuk-San's hand settle at the back of her chair, not touching her, simply there. The gesture of a man making a statement in the language men like him used for statements. The man across the table read it. She saw him read it. She saw the small adjustment behind his eyes, the recalculation, the update to whatever map he was operating from. And she saw, underneath that, the thing he could not fully suppress: irritation. The irritation of a plan encountering a variable it had not accounted for. She picked up her glass and sipped and set it down and smiled at something one of the other men said. And underneath her composed and luminous surface, she was running every detail of the last 4 weeks through her mind. Every word, every movement, every door she had opened and every one she had not. And she understood, with the particular clarity that arrives when many separate things suddenly cohere into a single shape, that she was no longer operating inside someone else's plan. She had become, without quite deciding to, part of his. And the most unsettling part, the part she sat with quietly, behind the warmth and the moon pendant and the straight black hair and the black dress that moved like water, was that she was not sure anymore when exactly that had happened, whether it had been a choice she made or a direction she had simply walked in. One morning at 8:45 at a time, until the distance back was longer than the distance forward. Outside the restaurant, the city moved. The rain had stopped 2 days ago and had left the streets with the clean, reflective quality of something recently honest. Somewhere 3 neighborhoods away, her brother was in a safe apartment, watching something on a screen, and not knowing how many invisible decisions had been made on his behalf by people he had never met. And at a table in a room with low, warm light and conversations that did not carry, Layla Renee Caldwell sat with her hand near but not touching the hand of a man who carried a crow on his neck and a weight in his eyes that she had stopped pretending she did not recognize, and she waited for the moment that he had told her was coming. Soon, he had said. She was beginning to understand what that word cost him to mean. It happened on a Thursday. Not dramatically, not with the kind of visible rupture that announces itself. No raised voices in hallways, no sudden convergence of black cars outside the building. No moment that a passerby on the street below would have noticed and remembered later. It happened the way the most consequential things in that world always happened. Quietly, completely, and with a finality that left no surface disturbed. Layla knew it was Thursday because Thursday was when the scotch was refilled. She had noticed this in her second week. The the same man, same time, 11 in the morning, arriving with a cloth bag and leaving with the previous bottle wrapped inside it like something being retired with dignity. She had never mentioned noticing it, but she had noticed it. The way she noticed everything in that office, cataloging the rhythms and rituals of a world that ran on precision and pattern. Because worlds that ran on precision and pattern were worlds where deviations meant something. At 10:53 that Thursday morning, 7 minutes before the Scotch ritual, Hyuk-San opened his office door and looked at her with an expression she had not seen before. Not the controlled stillness, not the recalibrating attention, something quieter than both of those. Something that had been decided. "Come in," he said. She came in. He closed the door. He did not go back to his desk. He stood near the window, the city behind him gray and enormous in the late morning light, and he looked at her with that new expression and said, "It's done." She stood very still. "The man from the dinner," he said, "made contact last night with the competitor he has been feeding information to for 8 months. He used a channel that my people had identified 3 days ago and had been monitoring since. The conversation was recorded. This morning, at 7, he was removed from his position. All associated accounts have been frozen. The competitor's operation has been referred to certain parties who will handle the remainder." He said all of this in the same even tone he used for everything. But she heard, underneath it, the particular quality of a man setting something down that had been heavy for a long time. "And Marcus," she said, "is free to go home," Hyuk-San said. "As of this morning. The man who constructed the debt has been dealt with. There is no record of any amount owed. There never was." Layla breathed in, out. She had prepared herself, in the quiet of her own apartment over the past weeks, for many versions of this conclusion. She had prepared for the version where it ended cleanly, and she walked away and returned to whatever her life looked like before this building, and this floor, and this amber-lit room. She had prepared for the version where it did not end cleanly at all, where the complications multiplied rather than resolved. She had prepared, in her most honest moments, for versions that were worse than either of those. She had not prepared, with any particular thoroughness, for the version where she was standing here, and it was over, and the city was gray outside the window, and she did not know, with any certainty she was willing to examine too closely, what she was supposed to feel about leaving. "You should know," Hyuk-San said, and something in his voice made her focus on him completely, "that the person who built the original scheme, who manufactured your brother's debt, who selected you specifically." He paused. The ring turned once on his finger. "He selected you because of your brother, yes, but also because of you. He had you researched. He knew your background, your intelligence, your composure. He believed that if you were placed close to me, you would eventually become useful to him in ways that went beyond information. He believed," he said the next words with a flatness that carried its own particular weight, "that a woman in your position, in this environment, could be made to feel isolated enough to be redirected." The room was very quiet. "He miscalculated," Hyuk-San said. "He did," she said. "On multiple counts," he said. The way he said it made her look at him more carefully. He was still standing near the window, still composed, still carrying that expression she did not have a name for yet, the one that had arrived this morning and had not left. And she understood, looking at him now with the full attention she had been rationing carefully for weeks, that he was not speaking only about the operational miscalculation, that he was speaking about something adjacent to that, something that existed in the same territory but belonged to a different map entirely. She crossed the room, not the whole distance, halfway. Enough. "You moved my brother before you told me," she said. Not an accusation, an observation. The kind that carries a question inside it. "Yes," he said. "You could have told me first. Let me make the decision." "I could have," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, a cloud shifted, and the gray light changed quality, became briefly something closer to silver, and the crow on his neck caught it, and the ring on his hand caught it, and his eyes, which were very dark and very direct, held it. "Because," he said, "if I had told you first, you would have made a decision based on protecting him. And protecting him at that moment required moving him before anyone watching you saw you react to information about him. Which meant I had to move him before you knew. Which meant..." He stopped. Something moved through his expression. "I had to ask you to trust a conclusion I hadn't yet given you the reasoning for." "You could have explained that," she said. "Yes," he said. "I could have. But explaining it would have required telling you that I had already decided I was going to protect him, and telling you that." He paused once more. And this pause was different from all the others. Longer, carrying something in it that he was choosing, with visible deliberateness, to let through. Required telling you why. "And I was not," he said, "ready to have that conversation in the middle of an active operation." The silver light held for another moment. Then the cloud moved on, and the gray returned, and the city resumed its ordinary, enormous indifference outside the glass. Layla looked at him, at the man who had built 20 years of survival on the discipline of revealing nothing that could be used against him. At the man who sat alone at 2 a.m, reading letters he never sent. At the man who knew the name of every person who cleaned this building. At the man who had moved her brother to safety before she even knew her brother needed it, and who was standing here now, in the gray Thursday morning light, telling her, in the careful language of a person who had not done this in a very long time, that he had done it because of something that had nothing to do with operational efficiency. "Are you ready now?" she said quietly. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had walked into this office in a red dress and sat on his desk and refused to be afraid of him, something in his face relinquished its composure entirely. Not dramatically. Not in the way that composure breaks in films, all at once, loudly. In the way it actually breaks in people who have been holding it for years. Quietly, around the edges first, a loosening, something behind the eyes becoming briefly visible before he could decide whether to let it stay. He let it stay. "I have been ready," he said, and his voice was lower than usual, carried differently, "since the second night. When you walked back out of here and I sat at this desk for 2 hours and thought about nothing that was in that folder." She closed the remaining distance. She did not reach for him. She simply stood close enough that the space between them stopped being a space and became something else. A presence. A weather. A mutual acknowledgement of everything that had been building in this room for weeks in the amber light and the Thursday Scotch rituals and the 8:45 arrivals and the careful rationing of attention and the moon pendant rising and falling and the ring turning once, slowly, the way a man turns something over in his mind when he is trying to decide whether to put it down. His hand came up and touched the line of her jaw with the restraint of a man who was handling something he understood to be irreplaceable. His thumb moved once across her cheekbone. He looked at her with the full weight of his attention. All of it, not the measured professional portion, but everything. The 2 a.m. version, the letter he never sent version, the 16-year-old boy and soul version who had walked into something he could not walk back out of, and had spent 22 years becoming very good at surviving it and very poor at anything softer than survival. "You should know," she said, and her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they have found their actual ground. "That I stopped being here for Marcus a long time ago." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "How long have you known?" "Since the night at the restaurant," he said. "The way you looked at me, it was not the look of someone executing a role." "I'm a very good actress," she said. "No," he said, and the not-quite smile arrived and stayed. "You're not." She resigned formally on a Friday. He signed the papers without a word, the black gold ring moving once as he set the pen down, and she carried a box to the elevator and pressed the lobby button and rode down 42 floors while the city tilted past the glass in its ordinary morning way. In the box, there was a plant she had kept on her desk, a lip balm, 2 notebooks, a spare pair of flats she had never needed, and an envelope she had not put there. She found it at the bottom, under the plant. No name on the outside. Inside, a single photograph, black and white, taken by the security camera in the corner of his office, the angle wide and slightly overhead. The night she had sat on his desk. The red dress gone to gray in the monochrome, her hair dark against her shoulders, her posture extraordinary, her face turned toward him with that expression she had believed, at the time, she was controlling. She looked at herself in the photograph for a long time. On the back, in handwriting that was precise and unexpectedly careful, "You were the best decision I never made. Until I did." She heard later, through channels that were not official and sources that were not named, that the competitor's operation had collapsed entirely within 6 weeks. That the man who had manufactured her brother's debt had relocated, quietly and permanently, to circumstances considerably reduced from his previous ones. That a certain import and logistics company on the 42nd floor of a downtown tower had passed several regulatory reviews without incident and continued to operate with the same impeccable tax records and fresh lobby flowers, changed every morning at 7. She heard that the man behind the desk, the one with the crow on his neck and the ring on his hand and the 2 a.m. letters, had been seen on a Tuesday evening in a restaurant that did not advertise. Not for business this time, not with men in suits whose jackets did not quite fit. Sitting across from a woman in something the color of deep water, with gold earrings and a moon pendant and straight black hair. And that the way he looked at her across that table was a thing that the server who witnessed it mentioned later to someone she trusted, because some things are too specific to keep entirely to yourself. Marcus never fully understood what had happened. Layla told him only that a situation had resolved itself, that certain people had confirmed the debt was fraudulent, that he owed nothing to anyone and could stop looking over his shoulder. He had questions. She answered the ones she could, and deflected the rest with the particular skill she had always had. And eventually, he let it go, the way younger siblings let things go, when they understand that the full story is being held back for reasons that have nothing to do with distrust, and everything to do with love. He noticed, in the months that followed, that she seemed different. Not happier exactly, or not only happier, more settled, more located in herself, like someone who had walked a long distance in uncertain terrain and had arrived somewhere that turned out, against reasonable expectation, to be exactly right. He did not ask. She did not explain. Some distances close in ways that cannot be narrated, only inhabited. And in a city that never quite slept, on a floor 42 stories above the ordinary, indifferent world, a bottle of scotch was refilled every Thursday at 11 in the morning, and a single lamp burned amber in an office with dark shelves and a heavy door with no nameplate, and a man who had spent 22 years being very good at surviving and very poor at anything softer, sat at a desk large enough to be a declaration and read, sometimes, a letter he had finally, on one particular Friday, decided to send. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room where everything was designed to make you feel small and chose to sit down anyway, not out of recklessness, but because you knew your own worth even when no one else did yet? Have you ever sacrificed your own safety for someone you love, only to discover that someone else was already quietly protecting both of you, without asking for anything in return? And have you ever misjudged a person completely, decided who they were before they had the chance to show you, only to realize too late or just in time that the most dangerous people are sometimes the ones most capable of an unexpected and absolute loyalty? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about courage, hidden truth, and redemption, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.